Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. When it comes to Star Wars, the attraction for most always came from the epic space battles. Giant fleets of warships clashing amongst the stars, generating massive debris fields. But for me, the most interesting battle in all of Star Wars was the Battle of Hoth. It featured an Imperial invasion against a heavily fortified Rebel defensive position and showcased infantry and armor battle. There's something odd about seeing this type of ground combat being shown in a franchise like this, especially when you know that all the soldiers in these scenes could easily be wiped out by a ship in orbit. Or could they? Today I want to take a look at the reason why there still is ground and infantry combat in a franchise where starships can basically destroy anything from the safety of space. But before we begin today's episode, a quick word from our sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. Raid Shadow Legends is the premier free-to-play turn-based RPG. At the core of this game is a rewarding gameplay loop that involves collecting new characters and upgrading them through a series of challenging raids and dungeons. Along the way, you are constantly rewarded with new heroes, armor, and other equipment. One way to make the most of your team is visiting the tavern, where you can exchange weaker heroes or duplicates for skill and level upgrades for your main squad. Once you feel like your team of heroes is strong enough, you can try larger community challenges like visiting Golden Peak or the Dragon Tournament. And you can do this not only on mobile, but also PC as well. And for Generation Tech fans, if you click the link in the description below, you'll get 100,000 silver and one free champion, the mighty Jotun. All of this will be waiting for you here. Alright, cool. Thank you for your patience. Now on to the rest of the video. Whether you're a stormtrooper recruited from the lower levels of Coruscant, or a vat-bred clone trooper from Kamino, or a rebel farmer from the Outer Rim, infantry combat is infantry combat, and things haven't changed all that much. I mean, sure, at one point there were massive melee battles in Star Wars. Let's just say blaster technology was lagging behind armor a bit at that time. Also, there were a lot of Jedi and Sith warriors back in those days, and they were a bit too cool to use ranged weapons. But for the most part, the life of the infantry soldier remained pretty stable. Well, as stable as you could be in a world full of energy weapons and gigantic ships. You still had to find cover, suppress the enemy, and maneuver to outflank them. Well, not everyone. Some guys just stood around in the open waiting to get hit. Now, for some reason, technology never replaced the more dangerous occupations in the galaxy. Which is strange because even here in our less technologically advanced world, combat soldiers are better protected and more removed from physical danger than ever before. Which is why casualty rates continue to go down and automation is definitely here to stay, at least in the military. This is not the case for Star Wars, where advanced technology is available, but the fighting from a tactical standpoint is still stuck in the World War II era. Which means more non-mechanized units, less combined arms tactics, and higher casualties due to risky offensive strategies. This is the type of infantry combat we'll be talking about. So the first and most obvious reason why there is a limited amount of ground infantry combat is the existence of planetary shields or base shields. During the Battle of Hoth, Echo Base was protected by a massive DS-02 shield generator manufactured by Quad Drive Yards. The same guys who pump out Star Destroyers and Dreadnoughts on the reg. These military-grade base shields were incredibly powerful and designed to be able to handle continuous bombardment from the heaviest of energy weapons, including turbolasers, which can be found on the largest Imperial capital ships. Since ground bases have a lot more space, especially when compared to the cramped confines of a ship, these shield generators could be massive and absorb a very large amount of incoming fire. We also have to remember, even without the shields, turbolasers, which fire out large globs of superheated plasma, tend to dissipate as it travels through thick gas. This greatly decreases the power and accuracy of these rounds, especially when it's traveling through atmosphere. Of course, it is possible to overwhelm a base shield. Not all of them were created the same way. During the Siege of Autolon, Grand Admiral Thrawn was able to successfully pierce a pieced-together rebel generator with a fleet of Star Destroyers. Now, aside from being vulnerable to a massive amount of continuous turbolaser fire, shields could also be circumvented by just walking through them slowly. Most of the time, these deflectors were programmed to stop high-velocity impacts like blaster bolts or even a bow and arrow. But if you were to slowly approach it, you could literally walk right through a deflector shield, just like the droids did at Naboo or the Empire did during the Battle of Hoth. During the Clone Wars, troopers actually would often use the same weakness in shields to roll ion detonators through the shields of a droideka. The next step after a base shield would be a planetary shield, and this presents a very different set of unique challenges. Because planetary shields provide 100% coverage over the surface of a planet, finding a way in becomes incredibly hard. Especially because you can't just park your ship outside of it and walk in. Maybe you'd be able to hang off of your ship while it's in orbit and rappel through the shield slowly, or at least theoretically that's one way you could do it. The only reliable way to get through a planetary shield is by using the Planetary Shield Gate, which is usually very heavily guarded. But that's how Rogue One does it during the Battle of Scarif, or how Han Solo and his Pathfinders do it during the Battle of Endor. Planetary shields were a completely different class of defense, and because of their even larger generators, they were impossible to take down even with an entire fleet of Star Destroyers. One of the reasons why the Empire created the Death Star weapon was to penetrate such defenses. So if you think about it, planetary shields completely balance the destructive force of a gigantic starfleet. And when that happens, a siege usually occurs, leading to a blockade of the system. If the planet is self-sufficient and the enemy is committed to the blockade, it could last years, if not decades. Now, there are several reasons why a military force would want to invade and land on a planet. During the Battle of Hoth, Vader's forces wanted to capture as many high-ranking rebel leaders as possible and potentially put an end to the entire rebel movement. Glassing the surface of the planet would be ideal because the planet was sparsely populated, but the base shield was in the way. Now, if a fleet were trying to invade, say, Coruscant, which is covered in a planet-wide city, there would be far more considerations. You really can't ethically use turbolasers on a planet like Coruscant because there are far too many innocent beings in the immediate area. If ethics aren't your concern, there are also vital infrastructure and irreplaceable industries. The planet is just too densely built. And while you can probably control the airspace around the planet without boots on the ground, there is no real way to establish dominance over it. This is why the Sith in the past settled for burning down the Jedi Temple instead of occupying it. They were being realistic. Even the extragalactic Yuzeng Vong had problems taming the planet when they seeded it with their own biological systems. The best planetary invasions are generally the ones that involve a peaceful transfer of power, especially on a world like Coruscant where you have so many systems involved in keeping things afloat. If you destroy the infrastructure while you're invading a place, suddenly the occupation of that area becomes a lot more difficult, like when the Iraqi army was disbanded during the US invasion in 2003. We've been trying to rebuild their military force ever since. You break it, you pay for it. And the Galactic Empire wanted stability more than anything else, which is why infantrymen usually accompanied any takeover. The infantry soldier is far more flexible and gentle than a cruise missile or some turbolaser fire. It makes sense that Emperor Palpatine would want to avoid Rogue One or Alderaan-like situations and instead preserve the worlds that are under his control. And especially in a galaxy-wide empire where each world is connected to each other in a very complicated supply chain, it makes no sense to completely destroy and disable a planet without trying to peacefully occupy it. And then there are just jobs that only sentient soldiers can do, like capturing a droid or some high-ranking official without harming them. Sometimes a more fragile and precise tool needed to be used. Now that we have clarified the various types of situations where infantry soldiers will be needed in a galaxy like Star Wars, what about mechanized units? Since World War I, more and more militaries have become dedicated to mobilizing their troops in all sorts of vehicles. Even in urban areas where being placed inside of a Humvee can be dangerous, has evolved into anti-IED vehicles like the MRAP, which features blast-resistant hulls. As we put more emphasis on keeping our soldiers safe, it also seems like a good idea to mechanize them as well. This means no more long foot patrols carrying all of your gear. It also greatly extends the distance of the average infantry fighter and provides them with much more protection and fire support. In Star Wars, it's also quite common to see mechanized infantry units like the Clone Trooper and their AT-TE platform, or the Stormtroopers and their variety of speeders and walkers. These larger vehicles almost have a symbiotic relationship with the soldiers. Without infantry patrolling around these larger vehicles, it's much more vulnerable to other infantry soldiers as well. This is another combat cycle that'll be relatively hard to change. Just because super weapons and crazy lasers are being developed doesn't mean it will completely replace other types of combat. Completely being the key word there. When the United States dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it did change the world, but it didn't entirely change what combat looked like. For one, it definitely didn't get rid of infantry combat. If anything, the destructive power of the nuke negated itself from ever being used again. So there you have it, guys. Despite all of the advanced technology and high ground that fleets occupy in Star Wars, there still are grunts on the ground fighting for little scraps of land. And for the foreseeable future, that's probably how it's going to be. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.